come up.
All right, thank you. You know, I missed Christian being here last week because I actually had to do all of that. And it is good to have him and have him take that responsibility so that I don't have to worry about it. As he said, at the end of the service today, we will have a special called business meeting, and I will talk about that at the very end of the service. Also in the announcements, you notice there's a deal and on the connection card, the trunk or treat. I encourage you to read that. If you want to be involved in that in any way, it's with Highlands Elementary School. They're raising money for their 5th grade camp at the end of the year. They're doing a trunk or treat as a fundraiser. So if you would like to help in that in any way, you can mark that and you can write on there on the connection card exactly how you'd like to help participate in that. Encourage you to do that. Well, today in the message, you know, we've gone back to 1 Chronicles and we're looking at the life of David. Last week we talked about how David became a leader, about how he established his effectiveness for the people of Israel. Well, today we're going to start to look at how did David start to build up new leaders? How did he raise up the leaders so that he could, in essence, almost take a step back from where he was and begin to focus less on the immediate and more on the big picture. And so the question I think we want to ask ourselves is how do we go about the process of building up new leaders? How do we find new leaders? And you know, you may look and say, boy, I'm in a place, I don't have to worry about finding new leaders because I'm not even a leader myself. Well, you are in some capacity. And we all need to think about what are we doing to raise up that next generation? What are we doing to help build up the next generation of leaders? You know, having Christian stand up here and do the welcome and the announcements, it's part of building up a new set of leaders. It's finding a person and saying, hey, let's start building them up. You know, in our Bible study classes, we ought to be doing that same thing. We ought to be looking around and how can we build up that next generation of leaders? Not even just the next generation. How can I build up the generation right now? Well, I want you to look in 1 Chronicles chapter 11. I'm going to pick up the story in verse 4. It says, Jerusalem was called Jebus at the time, and David led Israel's army to attack the town. The Jebusites said, you won't be able to get in here. But David captured the fortress of Mount Zion, which is now called the City of David. David had told his troops, the first soldier to kill a Jebusite will become my army commander. And since Joab, son of Zeruiah, attacked first, he became commander. Later, David moved to the fortress. That's why it's called the City of David. He had the city rebuilt, starting at the landfill on the east side. Meanwhile, Joab supervised the repairs to the rest of the city. David became a great and strong ruler because the Lord all-powerful was on his side. You know, you read this story and you go, okay, what's spiritual about this story? This is all about a battle. This is all about taking a town. And yes, it's true. It is. It's about the conquering of the city that is now called Jerusalem. And actually, probably not the entire city that is now Jerusalem. Most likely it was just a little sliver of Jerusalem. And I have a great picture on PowerPoint, but I could not find it this week. So I would have a great picture up there, but I couldn't find it this week. I don't know where it somehow got lost. I am going to find those because I am a little upset that I can't find that. But it's just this little sliver of the town. You know, as I read this, and I have this commitment that I want to preach through the entire Bible sometime before I retire. And so if I'm going to do that, I got to preach through this passage. And so, you know, I started and I just sat and I asked myself, so what? David captures the city of Jerusalem. Now, historically, that's an important point, obviously, because it becomes the city of David, and it plays a huge part later in the Bible itself. All of those things are great. But what can we learn from just this particular passage? And I think what jumped out at me is we can learn about leadership. And we can learn about becoming a leader of leaders. So David, a leader of leaders. He was preparing to attack the city of Jebus, or the modern-day city of Jerusalem. And as he was preparing the battle plan, I think David looked and he recognized where the battle was going to take place. And I think that David, as he looked at it, recognized that he could lead this battle on his own. Because again, it's really not a very large area that he was attacking. And I think he kind of recognized that he could lead this battle on his own. But David was thinking ahead, and he recognized that he needed leaders not just for today, but that he needed leaders for tomorrow. And he recognized this need for additional leaders. Because prior to this point, David's army had been really small enough that David could lead the battles personally. There wasn't a whole lot of times where David would go into battle and where he would have to spread his army out and, have them come in from different angles. And so David is recognizing that he's at a place now where his army is going to be big enough that he can't do it all himself. That he's got to have some other leaders. He really is at a place that Moses himself found himself. You remember the story. Moses was leading the people out of Egypt. And they get into the desert, and as Moses' father-in-law comes and he watches Moses for a day or so, and he goes, "Moses, this isn't good." Moses says, "Well, what's not good?" And he said, "This work you're doing is going to kill you." And so he said to Moses, "Here's what you need to do. You need to go through and you need to appoint elders. And you need to appoint leaders for 10, leaders for 100, leaders for 1,000, leaders for 10,000. And appoint these judges who can lead the people and guide the people underneath you." And Moses did it, and it was a great thing. Well, David is at that point where he is saying, "I can't lead everything like I could when we were just a small band hiding out in the wilderness. Now I'm the king of a nation. And I've got an army of thousands and maybe tens of thousands. What am I going to do?" And so David saw this battle for Jerusalem as an opportunity. It was an opportunity for him to find leaders for the future. Attacking Jerusalem was a daunting proposal. The people of Jebus say to David, they mock him and they say, "You can't get in here. No way can you break into this fortress." And so David recognizes and he says, "We got to find a way." They find a way. And as they're getting prepared for their attack, David is thinking ahead. He's thinking, okay, I need warriors and I need leaders, not just for today, but I need leaders and warriors for the future. Our youth ministry in some ways has taken this approach of thinking and saying we need leaders not just for today, but we need leaders for future growth. If you look in the roster of leaders within our youth ministry, it's kind of funny because we've got a ratio of probably pretty close on a normal Sunday. There's a ratio pretty close to 1-to-1. Almost one leader for every youth that we have. And you would look at, most people would look at that and they would go, "Well, you have way too many leaders." Our youth ministry leaders say, "No. We want to be prepared so when growth happens, so that when we reach new youth, that we're ready with the leaders." They're forward thinking. They're looking ahead and they're saying, let's build up the leaders now. Let's prepare the leaders now. Let's grow the leaders now so that when we really need them, we're not having to go out and all of a sudden try to grab some new leaders and throw them into place. That they're already in place. They're already serving. They're already growing. We need to do that in every aspect of the church. Great companies do that. Great companies don't just look and say, okay, I've got a position now and I got this great guy, okay, I'm going to put him there. A great leader in a great company is looking at people in their organization and saying, hey, this is somebody who could be good. Maybe they're not ready to be an executive vice president right now, but in 10 years they might be. And so I'm going to begin to develop this person now so that as we grow, they're ready to step into that place. David is looking at his leaders. He's looking at the soldiers and he's saying, I need somebody who can take up this position as the commander of the army, as the commanding general. And so he throws out a challenge. And he says, let's go. Whoever does this, whoever is the first to step up, whoever is the most courageous is going to be the one that I'm going to put into place. And that's how David motivated his leaders. He's looking for a way, how am I going to focus my soldiers? How am I going to energize them? Because what they're about to do is a very daunting task. Jerusalem sits up on a hill. And so where they're having to attack up a hill into a fortified city with the walls, all of that stuff. I mean, Jerusalem sits in a perfect location. It's a perfect location. If you are going to build a city, this is where you would build it. It's on a high plateau, valleys all around it, so that when you set up, you are always at the high point. And so the city of Jerusalem is there, and they're mocking him, saying, no way you can do this. And David is saying, how am I going to get in? How am I going to get my soldiers motivated enough to attack these walls that look impenetrable? And so he says, whoever is the first, whoever steps up and proves themselves to be a leader will become officially the commander of the army. And a man named Joab, who's a relative of David, he takes a challenge and he rises up. And Joab shows the courage that is needed to be the commander of the army. Leaders see a challenge as an opportunity for growth and as an opportunity for new leaders to arise. You know, David wasn't scared that Joab would overshadow him. Now, did David have reason to possibly be concerned that Joab would overshadow him? Yes, he did. All he had to do was look at his own history. Remember the song that was sung after David killed Goliath? Saul has slain his thousands, but David his 10,000s. David had good reason. David could just look at himself and go, you know, when I started rising up in the ranks, I became way more famous than Saul, and more people wanted me as king than they did Saul, so that when Saul died, a lot of the nation really didn't even mourn. They were just kind of like, okay, cool, now it's time for David. He could have been thinking, boy, if I raise up Joab and if I put Joab into this position, Joab was a man of courage, a fierce man. I mean, you read stories about Joab. Joab is one bad dude. I mean, he's tough. He's the kind of man that soldiers would want to follow. I mean, Joab just had everything that the soldiers would want to look at and say, yeah, that's my kind of guy. But David doesn't. David doesn't look at him and say, well, you know, boy, he could become more important, more powerful than me. He could take my position. It happens all the time throughout history. David says, no, I'm going to raise him up and I'm going to put him in that position. And it might be a disaster, but it also could be very good. And so David gives that opportunity, and he lets him go. And he expands because of this raising up new leaders. David is able to expand his influence far further than if he had ever tried to do it alone. If you are a leader, you need to find opportunities for people to rise up. Find opportunities for them to shine. Find opportunities for them to grow. The reality is, they might outshine you. They might very well do it so well that people will say, what do we need him for? You know, I go back, sometimes having Christian do the welcome and the announcements. He's going to do the announcements in a minute, or in a little bit. You know, it's kind of scary. I mean, he's a good-looking guy, pretty well-spoken. He might do so well that you guys might look and go, hey, he could do that just as good or better than Grant. And in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be gone, and Christian's going to preach for me. That's kind of scary. He might preach so well that you go, hey, he's even better than Grant. We can just get rid of Grant. We'll just have Christian become the new preacher guy. It's kind of scary. But you know what? We need to do it. Because if God is calling Christian to be a leader within the Christian community, within the church, if God is calling Christian to maybe at some point be a preacher, then I have a responsibility as a leader of this congregation to give him the opportunities to practice the gift that God has given him. and he might just outshine me. That's a risk. The other risk is he might do terrible. And I've had that before. I've had where I don't think he will. I've heard him preach once. You know, I had before when one of the first times that I had somebody come in and preach for me, it took me like a month afterwards to quell all the fires that this guy set. He was horrible. Oh, he was terrible. I felt so bad, man. I mean, I was just like, but I was told he was good. They might fail. When you enlist somebody to become a leader and you start to give them opportunities to serve, they might do incredibly well and they might outshine you. And if they do, say, God bless them, awesome. Because you simply get to expand your influence. And instead of having just some influence in one area, you can have influence in a multitude of areas. Or they might just bomb out. And if they do, learn from it and move on. But imagine being a person that unleashed a leader that took your organization from a competent company to a great company. I think that's a legacy worth pursuing. I want to leave a legacy that says Grant's influence went far beyond just a little church called Calvary. That Grant helped to develop leaders who became leaders in other congregations. That Grant developed leaders who became leaders within his own congregation, within the own ministry that he served in. Not so that I can look back at the end of my life and go, wow, look at me, look at what I did. But because God has called us to reach a world that is hurting, to reach a world that doesn't know Jesus Christ. And I can't do it myself. But if we begin to develop leaders, to raise up leaders who can teach the Bible, who can live the Bible, who can live out this faith and reach out to other people. And we're doing a part in fulfilling that Great Commission. And I want to do my part. I want to be a leader of leaders for Christ. I want to take the chance to provide opportunities for new leaders to arise. I want to be a person, and I want us to be a church that takes a risk and lets new people rise up to serve and to lead. And that means providing opportunities. And when we provide opportunities, sometimes they're going to fail. Look at the life of Jesus. Look at his ministry with the 12 disciples. Jesus did exactly what we're talking about David. With David doing, providing opportunities. You know, one of the last passages that I preached, the feeding of the 5,000. And when you really look at that passage, part of it is about Jesus providing opportunities. You know, the disciples come back to Jesus and they go, Jesus, we got 5,000 people. We don't have food. What are we going to do? What's Jesus' immediate response to them? You take care of it. You go do it. He said, here's an opportunity. Let me give you an opportunity to rise up and to do this. Now, obviously, we know from the story that they fail. They come back and they go, we can't do anything about this. Their imagination was lacking. And so they failed. But Jesus doesn't just give up on them and say, well, you failed. You're out of here. Let me go get 12 more. He continues to build them up. He builds them up. I want us to be a church that looks at new leaders and say, we're going to stand behind you. We're going to encourage you. We're going to try to build you up. And yep, somewhere along the line, you're going to fail. Somewhere along the line, you're going to bomb out. It's okay. We'll try to learn from it. And we'll pick up and we'll keep going. Because those same disciples that failed and failed miserably in feeding the 5,000 and in so many stories throughout the gospel, those same guys became the leaders of an organization that turned the world upside down. Yes, they failed, and they failed. But Jesus stood behind them. He guided them. He prodded them. And eventually they became the men that led the early church that turned the world upside down. Let's stand behind new leaders. Let's encourage them. Let's take a risk. Let's take a chance. Now, the best way to do that is to take some of you who are proven leaders in this church and pair you up right alongside somebody that's a new leader, that's looking and saying, I think God's calling me to step up. Let's take some of our proven leaders. We want to do that with our teams right now. We're trying to focus as we pick teams, as we pick our personnel team, our nominating team, our building and grounds, and our stewardship team. As we pick those teams, one of the things that I encourage the nominating committee, the nominating team to do is to think about, as we put people into places in there, let's make sure that we have a mixture of some new potential leaders and some proven leaders. And then we've got to learn how to help our proven leaders to take the time to pull those new leaders along and to give them responsibility, give them opportunities to stand up and to lead. Within our Bible study classes, we ought to be doing the same thing. If you're teaching a Bible study class right now, you ought to be looking at not just who could teach next Sunday if I had to be gone, but who, with some training, with some guidance, with some help, who could be teaching? Our youth director right now, April Lingang. When she first started teaching youth, she was terrified and she hated it. She actually went into work with the youth not to teach. She was just going to do the administrative stuff, and that was it. Well, some things happened, and all of a sudden she was thrown into a teaching position. I came in, started working with her. And at first, we divided the lesson up into 3 parts. At first, the first couple of weeks, I taught the whole thing. Well, then we were meeting together, and I started giving April one section. And we would work on that one section together, and I would work with her, and I'd help her to learn how to study and how to put the lesson together. And so then she started to teach one section. And then we went for a little bit, and pretty soon she was teaching 2 sections of the lesson. And then not long after that, she was teaching all 3 sections of the lesson. And not long after that, I wasn't even in the classroom, and we had gone out, and she'd gone out and recruited Robert, and Robert all of a sudden is in the classroom, and she's doing the exact same thing with Robert that she was doing with me. Robert, I don't know if that means she's going to be getting out of there before long. But she built him up. We helped April. April took that next step. We need to do that in everything. How can I take somebody who has a heart, who has a passion for the area of ministry that I'm involved in, and how can I build them up? How can I teach them that next step? Ask yourself that in whatever ministry area you're in. Whether it's running a soundboard or the projector, being an usher, being a greeter, standing out in the back, handing out bulletins. Ask yourself, how can I find somebody that I can put into place here and start training them to do this? And maybe I can even train them, and maybe they can do it even better than I do. Ask yourself, how can I provide an opportunity? If you got your connection card, under I commit to, we've got 2 challenges. The first is for those of you that are leading in some area within the church. I will find opportunities for new leaders to arise in the ministry I serve. If you want to take that challenge, I encourage you to mark that. And then what I want to challenge you to do is, once you've marked it, to go back and to think through your area of ministry and to begin to ask yourself, how can I give an opportunity for new leaders to arise in the area of ministry that I have? What can I do? And then the second one is, I will take the chance to serve and lead. This is for those of you that come in on Sunday morning and you sit in a pew. Maybe you go to a Bible study class and you sit in a Bible study class and you enjoy the teacher. You love coming here because you get to talk with your friends and you fellowship together and you enjoy all of those things. But you look and you say, there's not really anything that I do. I don't have a place where I serve. I want you to mark that. If you say, boy, I need to find that place that I can be a part of serving. And then we're going to give those names to the nominating team. And they'll look at places where we have and give you a call and say, hey, we got a spot that just might fit you. And you know what? It might or it might not. Sometimes we fail. And it's okay. We're not perfect. As a church, we're not perfect. As individuals, we're not perfect. And we might put you in a place that just doesn't work. If it doesn't, no big deal. Let's admit it and move on. But take the chance. Developing leaders is risky. But I think it's what God wants us to do. Let's pray together. Father, help us today. Help us to consider what you've called us to ask ourselves how we can be the leaders that you want us to be, and how we can help to raise up new leaders. Father, I pray that we would be a church that is known for giving people a chance, and a second chance, and a third chance to lead and to serve. That we'd be known as a place where you can come and you can be part of the team. And I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.